Well, hello there, folks. Welcome to the live stream for Miyagi Mornings episode. What is it today? 131. We will be rolling with this for the podcast here in just a moment. I always like to give just a minute or two for people to trickle into the live stream so that they can come in at the beginning if they so choose anyway. I see Joe and Buddy in the comments section on YouTube, and that's cool. And I do have Flote streaming as well today. And so I see real Gino, I'm not sure how to pronounce that over there. So, hey, how you doing? We got 2 people on Flote. I'm going to do the math and say 14 people on YouTube already. So we're going to be going here in just a second. I just want to point out today is going to be a touchy subject. I may repeat that when we start recording for the podcast. But I'm going to measure my words here. But I'm measuring my words for like filter words that might make me disappear from YouTube on this one. I'm not measuring my thoughts in relation to that censorship. I just want to say that this is going to be a touchy subject. And the way that I put it in the notes is for every minute that a person speaks about this subject, they should probably think for an hour. And I'll probably say that again in just a minute. Anyway, we're up to about 20 people here in the thread. Remember, if you guys want to submit something for one of these live feeds, the best way to do that, get over to MeWe. There'll be a link in the video notes of this video to my profile. And right at the top, you'll see a sticky, and you can post your question there. And it is the most likely place that I will see your question. I go there every morning if I don't have a topic, and I start looking at the recent comments. So if you commented a long time ago and I haven't done it yet, maybe do it again, and always be very specific and then details. All right. With that, let's get ready to go live on the podcast as well for that. All right, folks, welcome to Miyagi Mornings, episode 131. I got this question off the MeWe post, and it is an interesting one. It is a deep thought one. It is somewhat political, which I try not to do on Miyagi Mornings, but this is not really political. This is more like what if and when, and it's not about it. When I say I'm not political on Miyagi Mornings, I mean that I'm not trying to influence politics. I'm not trying to tell you which person to vote for, which one of your rulers to choose or something like that. Rather, I am trying to tell you how to deal with life, and what those clowns do matters, and what other clowns around us do matters. So here's the short version of this question. There's a lot more detail and thought given, and it's a very thoughtful thing, and it is on that same post. It's like the second to the last comment right now in the chain. You can go read the rest of it if you'd like to, but I'm going to read it directly for you to make sure I get it right. Jack, I've heard you wisely decry against foolish folks who would wish for some sort of violent insurgency. You've alluded, however, that there is a line that, if crossed by the state, could cause you to use firearms against them. I myself have been wondering where that line should be. I assure you there is no defeatist attitude here. I am hard at work building a better life. The events of the past few years, however, have clearly changed society for the worse. Certainly, society has been changed for the worst. And I would say that mostly in the macro, over the last 4 decades, society has been continuously changed for the worse, though there's been some victories for liberty and freedom mixed in there, because if you don't have freedom for all, you don't have freedom for any. That's my opinion. And there was a lot of things that in the last 40 years, I would actually say are fairly good, but the overall macro of movement has been toward more totalitarianism and more control by the state. And the question here, again, which I think is very thoughtful, is, well, where is the line? You know, we talk about the fact that if absolutely forced, armed resistance is the last resort, but it is a resort. Here's the thing. I think any of us that think with common sense, rationality, and ethics, it almost doesn't matter where our line is. Because I think that if you're in that group of people, the way things are right now, the decision is going to be made for you before it gets to your line. And I hope that makes sense to my folks that are in the live feed today. And what I mean by that is, I think it was really stupid that several 100,000 people went to the Capitol building. Okay? I think that was really stupid because in the circumstances and the way things were ginned up, what occurred was going to happen. I said the day before the rally, this is going to happen. Now, I do believe it was further ginned up and further encouraged by both Capitol Security and by the FBI with operatives. I believe that happened. But it couldn't have happened if they didn't go do it. And now there's a whole shit ton of fallout from that event that the vast majority of people that are being affected by it had absolutely nothing to do with. And whether you think it was a good idea or not, whether you were involved or not, whether you had anything to do with it or not, and I'm not saying that the people that are in jail from it deserve to be in there. I absolutely don't believe they do. I'm not saying there's not a double standard. I'm saying that there was a result that's bad for you that you didn't touch. And I'm using it as an analogy. Okay? I think the point at which you end up with, let's say we call it a hot war between some form of armed insurgency and the existing apparatus we call the United States government will occur before most rational heads would wish for it to, or reach the point where they believe it's necessary. And then it affects you. And I think that if it goes big enough, fast enough, you could be put into a point of having to choose a side. And I personally think we should be doing everything possible to avoid that ever occurring. And I want to quote for you right now Dwight Eisenhower, who, of course, was the commanding general of World War II, president of the United States, and one of, in my opinion, one of the last truly decent people, even though I don't agree with many things that he did during his administration, one of the last truly decent people to occupy the office of the presidency. He said one time, "I hate war is only a soldier who has lived it can. Only as one who has seen its brutality, its futility, and its stupidity." And I want to talk about a segment of society that I'm part of that you probably hear from often. Do you hear us talk about this thing being an eventuality? And I think some of the words that we say are either not for you if you're not part of this demographic, or maybe we're speaking sort of a different language. And I'm speaking of veterans, and I'm mainly speaking of veterans who have either served in combat or were trained in the Marine Corps or the Army prior to them getting rid of, let's say, bayonet training. Anything from that point backward, whether that person was in combat or a combat MOS or not. They take you into that realm at a very specific age for a very specific reason. Specifically with males, the prefrontal cortex of our brains are not fully developed until about the age of 25. Even brilliant people, they don't have that full development of the prefrontal cortex, which is where our empathy and our ability to think about the future as it relates directly back to us is. It's where it's located in the brain. So in other words, young people do stupid shit. Young people are also susceptible to programming at a much higher level than someone who's already crossed that threshold, especially when it runs counter to what is natural for the human being to do if you're thinking about your future and the future of the rest of the world, which is kill another human being. And what they do is they teach you to kill that other human being. And whether you agree with the tactic or not, it's because if you don't learn to do that and you end up in a situation where you do have to do that, you're going to die. And the people that are depending on you to have their six are going to die too. So we can say it's for ill, we can say it's for good. It doesn't matter. It is. And when you're dealing with people, and I'm not disrespecting the other two, major services, or even the third with the Coast Guard, or even the Space Force or whatever. But so, and if those people were in some sort of combat MOS or they were overseas, it applies to them as well. But in the Marine Corps and the Army in particular, this is done to the point where it doesn't matter what that person's job is. By the time that person comes out of basic training with a not fully developed prefrontal cortex and has been taught to knock down targets at 250, 300, 500 meters and see that target as nothing but a target and pull the trigger, that switch has happened in the person's brain. And it is why you will notice that people who come from that background at all have a very sick, twisted, dark humor. And I'm going somewhere with this that really needs to be understood by a lot of you that look on that aren't part of our group. And when you hear us say certain things with kind of a fatalistic attitude of like, yeah, well, if that's what it is, you know, or bring it on, or like we talk about something like, you know, when it happens and like they hear from the trees, the song, Let the Bodies Hit the Floor Coming or something like that. None of that should be construed to believe that us as a group want this. It is a dark, twisted humor that is speaking a language that is foreign to people who are not part of it. And anybody that's in the chat right now, that you come from that background, if you agree with what I'm saying, type Y in. Just for a yes. Just type Y into the chat. And the Ys will start flying because I know there's a ton of veterans in here. We don't mean it for you to hear it if you're not capable of dissecting the twisted, dark humor of it, because it's how we developed a coping mechanism. And the last thing we want is to see, there goes, yeah, why, yes. See, it's universal. If you from this, you know, background, or from anything where you were exposed to things like this, even if you weren't a veteran, where you actually understand what's going on here, the psychology of this mindset of, you know, joking about the book of Galatians or whatever, right? It is a coping mechanism, and it is speaking a language that would be as foreign to you as Chinese if you're not part of it. So when you hear us do that, what you actually should hear from us is, y'all motherfuckers don't want this. Y'all don't want to be exposed to this. You do not understand what happens when that switch goes in your mind and it can never go back. You can be a decent person. You can be a calm person. You can be a very sane person. You can be a very rational person. But when that switch is made in the human mind, where one has been conditioned and trained to take a life, it never goes away and it never stops affecting you, I believe, until the day you die. I'm going to be 49 this year. I came out of service at 21. And it still affects me. And I was not in any big battles or anything like that. That's not my bag. I was a freaking mechanic. And I'm telling you, when you lay on the ground completely exhausted at the end of that bayonet course, for example, and every single part of your being is gone. You are just gone. You can't move because you've never given that much to anything ever in your life. You've never been that driven with that much violence ginned up in your heart. Somewhere in that world, there is a switch and you can never turn it off. And that's why you hear us talk the way that we talk. It's not to encourage this, it's to discourage this. And it's also to just kind of swallow down the eventual reality that someday we may see what we know can be in our own backyard, and we don't want to. And again, I'm going to go back to the line, wherever it is for us. If you're sane and rational, wherever it is for you, will not be a line that we reach by our own choosing. There will be some point, if it happens, that a segment that is not anchored on one side or the other will start the battle. Someone will fire the shot heard around the world. And when that happens, then it's very difficult for that to be extinguished. And that's why I think almost every other option, and notice they use the word almost because sometimes people do not hear things like many or most or almost. Almost every other option is better. And the line needs to remain that if there is recourse, then there should be not war. And there should be not conflict, and there should not be violence. And the point, and my deepest fear, is that your government will push us there, is that we will reach a point where the average person feels there is no longer any recourse. There is no longer an alternative other than complete and total submission. And at that point, it's on. And that is the delicate balance the march of totalitarianism has played in our lives. Through most of us that are like my age, a little older, a little younger, you've watched it happen in real time. A very slow, gradual removal of rights and recourses and ways to redress grievances. And I think that the most likely scenario here is actually not this type of an armed conflict, though there could be some violent riots or something like that erupt here and there. I think more likely, we may be very well headed for what you would call an amicable divorce of the states. Different groups of states and regions breaking up like the Soviet Union did at the end of the Cold War. That may be very well the case. We may get to a point where people actually, and if you think about it, what always precedes this, when some sort of a super nation, superpower, republic, because, those of you that, believe in the word republic so much, it's like a magic unicorn. The Soviet Union was a republic. And what happened in the Soviet Union before the breakup was a large number of people used the freedom of movement, even in that totalitarian republic, to move. And they moved into satellite states that eventually became things like Lithuania, Ukraine, right, or Ukraine, Georgia, etc. When the rats notice the ship is sinking, what do? They swim away. And a lot of that happened. And I want you to just suspend, this whole it can't be thing for just a moment. And I want you to look at what's happening in the United States right now. It's not only that people are leaving what I would consider communist states. They're not going to all of the states that aren't communist. They're actually going to a very small, select list is the main places people are going. People are choosing places like Florida and Texas. And you can say South Dakota all you want, but there's only so much opportunity and hence security economically in South Dakota, though it's a pretty great place to live. But I mean, South Dakota has a population that's about the same as Fort Worth, Texas. So there's a limit to what that state can support economically. So what you're seeing is the states with the greatest amount of individual freedom, and that are not only like, because Texas isn't as free as, it's not even close to as free as Florida. It's not as close to as free as New Hampshire, but it's the states that are moving in the right direction toward liberty that people are specifically targeting and moving to. And so I do think this can happen. And what I'm going to end on, though, is, as always, as I've said for 13 years, I reserve the right to be wrong. And you guys know there's times that I've said this is going to happen. And 99 times out of 100, if I say this will happen, it does. There's times when I say this will happen, here's how I think it will happen. And generally speaking, it happens, but I may get the how wrong. And then there's times where I say this might happen. And this is a time I'm going to say, I do not know. I do not know. I don't claim to know. I'm only guessing at this. I do believe that if we ever end up in a full, armed resistance conflict within our country, it will be the case that people like myself, people like the people listening to me right now, people that the words I've said today resonate with and it makes sense, that decision will be made for us. We will not make the decision. And that's a very, very dark reality. But I don't know that it will happen. I know that's how it will happen if it does. I do not think we will all get together and go, yeah, guys, you know what? They like they did during the American Revolution. This has gone too far. Start forming, well-organized militias, appoint our own Congress, and then write a letter to the president like the colonists. Like, that's not going to happen this time. That's not how this will go down if it goes down. And my belief is it probably will not. But I could be wrong. And I think what that means is strategic relocation within the borders of the United States right now is probably a good idea. For that and many other reasons. It's one of these things that right now I see an incredible amount of potential upside to and very little downside to. Very little downside to. There is a reality that if something like this is going to happen, whether it be conflict or whether it be amicable divorce, there's a side of the line that you don't want to be on. And the truth is, if you were alive in 1850, the side of the line you didn't want to be on was the south side of the Mason-Dixon line. No matter what your feelings about the why, the where, the what of that conflict are, the results of that conflict dictated that you would have suffered far more if you would have hung out in Georgia versus taking the opportunity to move to like Massachusetts. That would have been a better place to be when everything went. And if you have a peaceful resolution, I'm going to tell you that you were far better off being on the Lithuanian side of the border between Lithuania and Russia when the Soviet Union fell apart than you were being on the Russian side of that border. So whether it be peaceful or conflict, the places I don't want to be are the same places I've been saying to get out of for other reasons for years. California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, the entire damn Northeast. You know, maybe the exception is New Hampshire, but you're in an island now. I mean, I hate to say that because the Free State sponsors my show, and they might get mad about me saying this, but, you know, maybe. But if I didn't live where I live right now, I'd either be moving to where I live or I'd be picking Florida. Those are my thoughts. And I know that's not really where this started out, but, you know, and I mean, like Life Starts Now is saying at least the Upper Peninsula of Michigan will secede. You don't know that, dude. There's this entire idea of that like where I am is going to work out. I'm not saying where I am is going to work out. I'm just saying in all the scenarios, it's probably one of the better places to be. You're in the Upper Peninsula. What are you going to do? Be surrounded by the basically communist United States and the communist states of Canada? I know people don't want to abandon their homes. I'm not saying to do it. I'm just saying that's a possibility. Anyway, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today, and I will be back with a much more happy subject to wrap up the week tomorrow. And guys, there in the chat, I'll stick for just a little bit. Steel Horse, you know what you need to do? He says Georgia's blue now, Texas and Florida hanging red by a razor. You need to stop reading the mainstream media that tells you that, and you need to visit either one of these states. And you also need to realize that the mass influx of people into these two states is actually positive toward keeping them red states. 3-1 over people natively born here. So I'll just say that. Anyway, this is not a happy subject. And I really hope that Pennsylvania's screwed, Edward. You're screwed. You're absolutely screwed. Rural Pennsylvania votes Democrat, man. Heavily. I mean, there's your razor thin. Rural Pennsylvania looks, you know, so red. The rural parts of Pennsylvania are razor thin red-blue. And then your cities and your high-end suburbs like Westchester, you're screwed. You're totally screwed. The only place that's screwed more than you is New Jersey, right next to you. New York just went under like a full gun emergency, according to the governor. Like, what the hell does that even mean? It sounds a lot like, you know, when they seized guns during Hurricane Katrina is what it sounds like to me. There's no good answer here. That's what you guys have to realize. There's not, like, if I go here, I'm not saying you come to Texas, you'll be safe. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you're playing the odds, you want to be in a place that has two things: a predisposition toward liberty in the first place. You're not going to get perfect from any state, lower or uppercase. You're going to get tyranny. If there is a state, there is tyranny, but a predisposition toward greater liberty and sufficient resources to stand on its own. So, like, I don't want to crap on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but it is not going to stand on its own. It doesn't have a seaport. It doesn't have an ocean. It doesn't have the ability to generate its own power. It doesn't have much of a military. I think the Texas National Guard is something like the 11th largest military in the world. And that can be bad, too. It can certainly be bad too. And that's something that people really need to understand. There's no place you can go where you're guaranteed. I'm just telling you, if I'm going to play the odds, the two places I'm going to pick most likely right now are Florida and Texas. And there's some other states that I think have a lot going for them. Arkansas has a lot going for it. Oklahoma has a lot going for it. Tennessee. You talk about something that walks the edge, it's Kentucky. Kentucky could go in a heartbeat, really, to the wrong side. Y'all in Tennessee need to keep them people out of your state. They're not moving for the reason people come here. I'm going to tell you, when you hear this stuff about, they're going to move in and change it, you need to come here before you make that decision. Any place you're thinking about moving, go spend some time and not a weekend. And talk to the people moving here. The people moving here, I'm like, damn, you're more hardcore on this crap than I have ever been in my life. I mean, the people coming here in general are pissed. And they're like, we need immigrants. And I've said this before, and I'm going to wrap up the stream now because that's a busy day for me. But we need immigrants within the United States. And I'm talking about our own our own people immigrating from other states. The school systems are churning out statist, liberal nonsense at an alarming rate. And again, that prefrontal cortex where they can teach you to kill when you're 18 very easily. You take a kid without that development and you teach them this nonsense from the time they go into kindergarten when they should be worried about like when it's nap time and how to color with a crayon inside the lines. And you start this shit then. They're literally creating it's a Democrat voting machine, stamping them out left and right. And we've got the head of the largest teachers union in the United States today came out and said that, what if you're a teacher and you want to teach critical race theory, you just go ahead and we got a great big legal fund to defend you. You just do it. I don't give a shit what what your state says. This is what we're dealing with. And we don't need razor thin majorities here. And I'm not a political person at all. So when I say majorities, I'm not just talking about the people who vote. See, my thing is I have a limit to what I will tolerate. And my neighbors have a limit to what we will tolerate. And if the people down the road want to basically create HOA type hell, but they want to use the city government to do it, they're free to do that. But you're not doing it here. And so I think even if you're going to take this strategic relocation on, my final thought on this today is you need to be strategic about the strategery, right? In the words of W, you need to be strategic about the strategery. So Texas, if you move into Dallas, you've not helped yourself. If you move into Austin proper, you have not helped yourself. If you move into certain locations within the city of Houston, you might as well stay in freaking, I'm not going to say San Francisco, but you might as well stay in like Chicago. Honest to God. So when you move, you need to be strategic about where you go within what you do. So you have to look at this as a multi-enveloped process. You have the envelope of the state borders. And if you think there's no difference, and I'm in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, you're the ones that couldn't go to the one side of the Walmart for half a year last year or more, right? Our lives didn't change. This is the greatest litmus test because governments did what the people of their states allowed them to do. Elections be damned. This is the biggest lesson from COVID. If you're thinking about where I want to ride the rest of this shit out, if you go to a state or stay in a state that locked its people down like a gulag during COVID, you know what's coming next. More. And these states like Texas and Florida, it wasn't because Abbott and DeSantis were like, as pure as the driven snow and believed in liberty. It's because they looked out their window and went, yeah, this isn't, well, we better not. And I think there was some predisposition in the state governments to be more toward the size of rationality. But in the end, do you know why the lockdowns are really ending right now everywhere? Because people said no. And all I'm saying today, guys, is if you're worried about the kind of subject we're talking about today, you want to be in the place where the most people have already said no. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed it. You guys have a great day. And I got a great interview coming up for the podcast today, and I got 30 minutes to get ready for it.